The Theudrcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the Theudrcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The Theudrcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the Theudrcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. Welcome everybody. It's Bill Ward with the Theudrcast, your host. Today I have a very special guest. We're doing a little bit of something different. Normally on the podcast I do interviews with addicts and alcoholics. I do my own little takes on various aspects of recovery. You know, I might throw in a speaker tape in there, and I do some other things. But today we're going to hear from a mother who has recently lost her son, and she has two sons. One is now passed, and the other part to this woman's story, her name is Robin. Another part to Robin's story, she spent her whole life pretty much living around addicts and alcoholics. And we know as behaviors of addicts and alcoholics, it's not only just the substance. There's a lot of self-destructive behaviors and other destructive behaviors that are kind of combined in with this illness, as we describe it as the spiritual malady that manifests itself into addiction and alcoholism. So Robin, I just really would like to thank you for joining me here today, and just introduce yourself and say hello to the people, and take a minute and just kind of say what you want to say, and we'll get into the interview.
Thank you so much, William. I appreciate you having me on. So my name is Robin, and I recently lost my son Taylor. He was 28 years old. Right now it is believed that it was a fentanyl overdose, but we're still waiting on the toxicology report, so it's still a little vague. It takes a lot of months apparently for them to come back with anything. I think they're really backed up because this is obviously a huge epidemic, and they can't seem to move through it quick enough. So it takes time. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
And it's fairly fresh, right? It's only been what, 2 and a little bit of months?
Not even. No, it hasn't even been 2 months.
Not even, eh?
No.
So when I asked you if you would consider doing this, being so fresh, you didn't hesitate. But why did you think that it might be a good idea?
Because I know there's so many other parents out there that are going through the exact same thing, and I went through years and years with my son's addiction, 15 to be exact, in total torture a lot of the time because I thought I was alone. None of my other friends were going through this, not to say none of them, but most of them, their kids were going to school, going to college, doing things that, you know, we kind of all think kids should be doing. And then I just felt very isolated and alone. And, you know, even back then I was like, gosh, I really should start something. I should start a group or something. And to be honest, I was so exhausted from doing everything on my own, you know, with him, and, you know, I wasn't with his dad. And it was, honestly, it was draining, and I had all these great ideas, but I was just, I spent a lot of the time. Yeah.
You're spent.
Totally spent.
So, you know, as we do see there's a total epidemic, and I know a lot of addicts and alcoholics because I am one, and I also have seen like an influx of death recently, especially in the last like 8 months. I also work for a First Nations community and spend a lot of time out there, and I see it ravaging the nation and all the nations across Canada. And we need to do something about it. And I know that the government is, you know, dumping all this money into all these avenues, but they don't seem to be making a dent in it. And like you and I have had this discussion before, where it's way more of a spiritual condition, a spiritual sickness, than it is the mental sickness. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I would.
Okay, so part of my mandate as a podcaster and as a recovery activist and influencer is I really want to change the narrative from mental health to spiritual health. Yes, mental health is a huge component to spiritual health, but it's almost like, you know, the government and some of these organizations and, you know, the people that run the government, AHS, health services, they kind of go away from the spiritual component. And if you talk about spirituality, they almost like ignore you and don't want you involved in these things. And I think it's a huge mistake, because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of addicts and alcoholics, and the ones that are successful work on the spiritual solution, right? So, you know, where I'd like to go with you, Robin, and I'm going to paint a picture for the people, or actually, you know, Robin's an amazing woman. She's very normal, whatever normal is, but she's got her shit together. She's done a lot of her own self-examination. She's, you know, always been, I think, more or less on the right track and trying to follow the right track and moral and like moving forward in a good way as a mother, as a wife, as a person in this world. And, you know, so she comes from, like, you know, a good upbringing for the most part, right? We all have our own fucked upness here and there, but for the most part, she's pretty fucking normal. And to see her sitting here with the sanity that she sits here with, in my opinion, with all the shit she's been through in her life, it's pretty fucking amazing. So I'd like to kind of go back in your life a little bit, like when you were younger and you were kind of like getting out of high school and you're kind of moving into, you know, relationships with, you know, potential partners, let's say dating and things. And then you ran into maybe the first alcoholic or addict in your life, which was the person you ended up marrying. How did you see that progress, and what were some of the symptoms that you would see in that person that you maybe can look back at, and maybe those were red flags, but at the time you didn't really notice it? And was he an alcoholic right off the bat, or did he grow into it?
I think he was an alcoholic right off the bat. You know, he was that person that, you know, maybe it was only 3 or 4 beers a night, but it had to be every night. It was like he couldn't settle down or feel good if he just, you know, and it was like, oh, it's only 3 or 4, so what's the big deal? And I thought, you know, because I thought back to like my upbringing at times and the amount of alcohol that would be drank, and it was like, yeah, okay, 3 or 4 is not that bad, right? And I think for a few years it really wasn't a big deal. Like there wasn't really I wasn't seeing any bad behavior, you know. It wasn't until later on that some really negative behavior started to come out, and I was like, holy cow, this just is like reminding me of, you know, the alcoholism growing up. And it was like, yeah, no, this isn't cool, you know.
So you mentioned alcoholism as you were growing up. So there was some of that in your past as you were, you know, being brought up in the world?
Oh, yes, huge amounts. Yep. It was pretty chaotic, actually. Yeah, it was a really, and I mean, I think children of alcoholics all, you know, we all can agree. So it's not a fun way to grow up, and especially when there's violence in the house. And I'm not saying there was violence toward me. It was violent, though. The drinking would cause violence. And so I was that kid that, you know, I kind of grew up hating that. I hated alcohol. I wasn't really a drinker. I mean, I would drink with my friends if I'd go out. I could do that, but then I could totally leave it and just, you know, because I kind of knew the other side of alcohol, and I thought, and I certainly didn't want my kids around it. You know, I kind of thought, oh, if I kind of hide that from them, you know, so a lot of times I was hiding the alcohol. You know, if Dad was drinking at night, they were already in bed. I was cleaning up the beer cans, putting them in the garage so the kids wouldn't see them in the morning. So I kind of managed it, you know, from that perspective of them not really getting exposed to that.
So kind of what I'm hearing, and you gotta, you know, excuse me because I'm addict alcoholic. I'm really in recovery. You're already developing some Alanon behaviors.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
Taking care of things.
Yep. 100%. And I had done that my whole life without knowing that that's, you know, that I was a codependent person.
So you just think you're doing the right thing, and
Yep.
this is kind of what you should do, and not really realizing that it might be enabling or harming you, and like maybe prolonging a bad situation. You're just kind of doing what you thought was right.
Yeah, I was covering it up for my kids. That's what I was doing. I just didn't, I thought, oh, if I just clean this up, they're not going to see it and they won't question it.
And now you're speaking about with your family and your husband as he's drinking, and we're moving through those early years.
Yep.
So as you were moving through those early years of marriage and you started seeing these signs of alcoholism and the behaviors that kind of attach to it and precede it often, did it hit you in the subconscious? Because you had mentioned like, oh no, this is what I remember when I was a kid. Did you notice anything in those moments where you started seeing the behaviors where you were like, holy shit, this reminds me of when I was a kid, or did you not really think about it yet?
Oh no, everything started to increase and the behaviors started to become very similar. And again, not saying that my husband was violent or anything, but you know, he would do really crazy things when he was drinking, you know, like he'd start throwing stuff around and you know, he'd get like just crazy. Never hurting the kids or nothing like that, but just things that were like, what are you doing? You know, and then the next day I'd be like, okay, this has got to stop. Like, this is like, I don't want to be married, you know, to you behaving this way. Like, come on, you know, like we don't want to raise our kids like this. And at that point, the kids had started to see stuff. You know, there was a classic Christmas time where, you know, he had really kind of gone off and you know, and was, and again, you know, throwing chairs around in the kitchen, nothing, you know, nothing really crazy, but it was crazy enough that it woke the kids up, and it was Christmas Eve. And I was just devastated by this, to the point where I called his brother. I said, come get him and get him out of the house. Like, you know, it was just not a cool thing to do. And you know, and he'd come back the next day and, you know, kind of crawled into bed for the whole entire day and didn't even get up. Didn't get up until Boxing Day. And I'm kind of like, holy shit, you know, like I started at that point just thinking, oh, what am I going to do here? I don't want these kids to see this. But yet I love my husband and I want my marriage to work. And, you know, you just get into a really crappy situation and you don't really have an answer. And then you get told, oh no, it's going to change. And so I believe it. I think it's actually going to change, because you would start to see things change. And they may change for a month, But then it always goes back.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, you kind of say, okay, that's it. I'm going to, you know, you start saying, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to put up with this. But then there's a whole bunch of barriers in front of that too, right? And I hadn't done enough work at that time, and I was so insecure of my abilities to be on my own and to take care of my kids on my own, even though I was technically a single mom. The whole entire marriage, I was the one that fully took care of the kids in every aspect. My husband was there as a parent, but wasn't really a present parent. So yeah, that was hard. You know, I felt very alone again and isolated. And then, you know, you kind of come in with all these experiences from your childhood, and you're just operating on all that shit. That's it. You know, and you don't recognize it, and it takes time to recognize it. So it wasn't until, you know, kind of my early 30s, I started to really kind of go, okay, you know, this isn't right. I got to start changing things. Still not really realizing that I was a codependent person. And then in my mid 30s, I really started to do deeper work.
So I wanted to stop you there. As you said that you hadn't done any work yet at this point, and it's just life, right? You don't notice anything. It's just kind of, you're the fish in the water that doesn't know it's in water, and you're just kind of moving through the best you can. You haven't done any work on yourself yet, so you don't really know that you're maybe overlapping codependency. But you had mentioned like the insecurities, that the barriers that you were afraid to maybe knock over or blast through to make the changes. So for some of the other women that might be listening, or men, depending, right? What type of barriers and what types of insecurities did you look back at and go, yeah, I couldn't break through those because of, what were they?
First of all, I didn't think I was enough in my own self. You know, I just didn't think I was good enough. That always came up. I didn't think that I was capable of going out and getting a career. Like, I just didn't feel like I was smart enough, or like there was all these crazy things. I look back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was so harsh on myself. You know, those are probably the two biggest ones coming to my mind. You know, and just, yeah, I just did not feel good in my body at all.
Were you worried financially?
Oh, 100% financially, because, you know, early on when we had the kids, you know, my husband really wanted me to stay home. And I'm not going to say I didn't. I wanted to stay home with the kids too, because I felt like that was going to be the best way for a while, at least, right? Until they get to a certain age, and then I can work. And so that was totally agreed upon. And so you kind of get into that thing where I was a mom. I loved being a mom. But the thought of leaving and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go get like a menial job, because I didn't end up going to college, because I had, you know, Taylor at 20 and then my other son at 23. So I really didn't have, you know, those opportunities at that time. Yeah. So, you know, like you don't feel like, it's like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to go work for a job for $10 an hour or $12 an hour. How am I going to support these kids?
And the dream is, and the vision of the future is we're going to be married. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. We're going to raise this family together. And I don't need to go deeper into school. I don't need to do these things, because it's the vision and it's the idea of what you think it's going to be.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. The fantasy.
The fantasy.
And the fantasy we all buy into.
How about the institution of marriage? Did the beliefs within like marriage, like making sure you stuck out the vows, was that part of it too?
It was really important to me. You know, I made that commitment, and for me it was a very serious commitment. But yet, you know, growing up, it was just, my house was just insanity. Like there was no stability there whatsoever. So I didn't really grow up with that, but I had my grandparents that were super stable. So I watched their marriage. And so yeah, I was kind of torn, you know, like it would be easy for me to talk all the time, be like, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of this. This is ridiculous. But then there was that part of me that was like, no, you know, this is your husband. You chose him. You need to stick this out. He needs help, you know, like he has this problem. Who am I to just walk away from him and just discard of him, you know? And so, yeah.
I often talk with people that I'm working with, or, you know, friends that we talk about. We talk a lot about these things we're talking about today. And I often mention that, you know, at least 50% of marriages fail. And 25% people stay in loveless relationships because of the fears and the barriers that they're afraid to break through to go on their own. And then maybe there's 25% of marriages that are actually pretty decent, right? And the 50%, like normally I think, this is what I think, in the world of the material of which we live, we get together in these relationships at these younger ages for the wrong reasons. You know, it's a lot based in ideas, it's based in the fantasy, it's based in the future, it's based in possession, it's based in control. Essentially, it's all based in the ego. And a lot of women, you know, when they're younger, they want a guy that makes good money so that they can be taken care of. But underlying that is fear. You know, they want a big, strong guy that they feel protected, but underlying that is fear. So the relationships themselves, right from the word go, are tainted by fear, and really successful relationships are built, like we both know today at our older ages, vulnerability and truth and honesty. And there's a lot of that hidden in the younger years, and then we try to like make things work, and many times as we go through these relationships, we dishonor our own self and our own core, right? Do you feel 100%. That as you were going through that, maybe in the later years, you were dishonoring like your own core of who you were?
Oh my gosh. I was eroding so quickly. I called it soul suicide is what it felt like to me. You know, like I felt like I had no soul at one point. There was nothing left inside of my body. And I just kept thinking, okay, I just got to stick it out till they're 18, right? Like, I just got to stick it out. And honestly, it was at the point where I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, I literally feel like I'm dying. I am dying inside with this person. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse by the second. And at this point, then you start to see how it is affecting these kids. These kids are watching, you know, their parents in a loveless marriage, just, you know, trying to stay together just for the sake of staying together, you know, for what? But they don't understand, right? Because they're just like, it's mom and dad, right? And they don't want you apart. But it's, yeah. Yeah.
And through these years, I'm sure that the alcoholism was getting worse. So the actual drinking part was getting worse. I'm assuming the behavior parts were getting worse. And I'm assuming that even when your husband wasn't drinking, those behaviors were also getting worse. And why can I probably assume that in a good way? Because I am your husband. You know, I am the guy who, you know, had my wife, and I wasn't drinking at the time when I was with Shannon, but I was very angry. I was very selfish. Shannon pretty much raised the kids. I wasn't around for basically 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. I was out making sure that everyone knew who I was. I was out trying to get status and making the money and proving to everybody that this guy from Ogden could fucking be the successful businessman. And you know, it was all about me, selfish and self-centered to the core that I was. And as I know this now today, but every time I dishonored my own self, my anger and my shame and my guilt just got worse, which is that spiritual malady that made me need to use eventually down the road again. Right? So, you know, your husband's kind of, you know, walking through life and doesn't really know what's happening, and you don't know what's happening. And then, you know, your kids are starting to witness this, and I can relate to that. When me and Shannon finally broke up, because I lost everything, it wasn't like she wanted to leave me, but I was destroying our relationship. and I destroyed our family. And then I saw my kids like being angry and violent. And I remember those first 2 years when I was in recovery, I'd get calls from Shannon. She'd tell me like, Lucy's fucking out of control. She's getting in fights. She's getting suspended. And Jillian's using Lucy's anger and violence as a tool in her junior high school. And they're using all of these traits that I taught them. And I'm trying to change by this point. I'm like, holy fuck, look at the damage that I've done by my behaviors and what I've just shown them.
Yep.
Right?
100%.
And, you know, by the grace of God, grace of Creator, today they've really turned the corner and come back around the other way. So I can relate. So as you kind of go through maybe the next phase of your story where the kids are growing up and you're still with your husband, what was that like? And did you see addict or alcoholic tendencies in your kids and kind of get into maybe like the early teenage years?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, let's just go back a little bit. First of all, there was a lot of mental abuse that my husband dished out to me, a ton, in which the kids were witnessing for quite a while. You know, I'm going to say probably a good 10 years they were witnessing, you know, how to treat a woman. It was awful. And, you know, after that, I would always say to my husband, you need to go, you know, because he would finally say maybe sorry and own what he had said. And I'd say, you need to go talk to your boys because your boys are watching you and they're like sponges. And so they're learning how to treat women by your behavior, right? So anyway, we'll back up to when, you know, when Taylor was 5 years old, I had recognized in him that he was very, almost like he would get obsessed with whatever he was into. So he was into, I remember him being really into Batman, and it was almost so obsessed with Batman at the age of 3. That's when it started. For years, like he was so obsessed with these, he would almost get into character, and he thought he was Batman. Like he would just get so into everything. It was into Jurassic Park, and like so into it that you were like, you know, I said to my husband, gosh, I hope he doesn't ever do drugs. And that was at 5 years old. I said, because there's something in his personality that is showing me that when he likes something, he like dives into it, you know. And something told me. So I went out and got a book on addiction to read to kids, and I started reading that to him at the age of 5, him and his brother, because there was something I sensed in there that wasn't, you know, he needed to hear. And so I always talked openly about drugs to them and alcohol and the damages, you know, that they do to families, and, you know, and it was age appropriate. I wasn't, you know, throwing anything crazy at them. It was some, you know, things that they could understand. And I really thought being that parent was great, because I thought, gosh, they're going to know, they're going to be afraid to do drugs. That's not the case. That's not the case at all.
So as you guys are growing up, you're seeing some of these addict behaviors, maybe, you know, maybe they are, I don't know. But I noticed them in my daughter too when we were younger, and when they were younger. And I said to Shannon, I'm like, I think Lucy's a future addict. And my wife was just like so mad at me for saying that. Well, it turns out, you know, she pretty much was. And there's certain things you can kind of notice, and, you know, it's not, you know, I kind of feel bad saying it, but at the end of the day, like there are certain things that you can kind of see, and, you know, hopefully you can maybe do some things as a parent to kind of steer it the other way. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know even where I'm going with that, but
well, it's circumstances too, right? Like it's the environment. It's the environment that they end up in. So, you know, and I think that's really big, you know. It's like, how supportive is your environment? And when my husband and I split up, that was enough of a loss that was it. He was off and running, right? He didn't need anything else. So it didn't matter, you know, what I said, what I tried to do. He was just, that was it.
Okay, so getting into these teenage years, I know he started pretty young, right?
He did,
Taylor?
at 14 years old, yeah.
Kind of talk us into those early days on what you saw and what you had to experience, and what was his brother seeing? What was his dad doing?
So we broke up, and both the boys were with me originally, and Dad had moved to a different house, which was not in our agreement initially, but that's what happened. Then Dad kind of started to manipulate my youngest son to make him feel bad that he was on his own, even though he had the dogs. So my youngest son wanted to go move in with his dad. I was pretty upset by that, but he was at an age where he could make that decision. And so I figured he was 11 turning 12, okay. I think. Yeah. So, I thought, okay, it's not far away. I can still see you all the time. That's okay. So kind of fast forward a few months, Dad is having a breakdown. He doesn't want to live in Calgary anymore. He wants to move to BC, and he wants to take my youngest son with him. And at that time, I was just heartbroken. Like, I was crying. I was like, no, I don't think this is a good idea. My husband was crying. He said, please, like, let me just take him. I promise it's going to be good. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to fly him back once a month for you. He made all these promises. And I was just sick to my stomach because everything was happening so fast. Like, our marriage had dissolved and everything was happening. And he had left me in our house on an acreage way out of town. And he just up and left. All of a sudden, here I am trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for this house, which is up for sale, how all this is going to go down. And he's just kind of washed his hands and walked away. And so I was so stressed out at the time. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. And I shouldn't have let my youngest son leave. It was the biggest mistake I ever made, actually. But I said yes, because my youngest son was like, Mom, I get to decide and I want to live with Dad. And I said, okay, you know what? Okay. And then he got out there and my husband's whole tune changed. He was just acting erratically. And, basically it was like, I've got, our youngest son, you've got Taylor. That's how we do business. I was like, no, you don't. Like, both these kids are our kids. We have to parent together. Like, that's what we have to do in order for, them to be okay with what's just happened, like it's just boggled my mind he would even like view it like that. So we ended up, so in the meantime, I'm noticing behaviors from Taylor. I'm noticed that he's, I'm getting calls from the school. He's skipping school. He's acting really strange when he would get home, like really bizarre behavior. And I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe he's smoking pot. Like, there's something not right. One night his friends brought him home drunk. And I kind of was like, okay. And then I'm thinking back, I thought, well, this is pretty normal behavior, I think, for kids at this age, right? Like, I thought I was doing that kind of stuff too, like just being ridiculous, right? Drinking, whatever. So I didn't think too much, but I kept having conversations about it, like, what are you doing? You can tell me. I'm not going to get mad. I just want us to have an open communication about what you're doing. And, and he admitted he was smoking some pot. And I said, okay, well, we need to get a handle on that. Like, you don't want to, dive right into that and like that become your life. Like, you've got school, you've got, all this stuff. And then in the meantime, but I'm also dealing with my youngest son, who is now, his dad has basically got him out there and is allowing him to do whatever he wants. And so I'm like, no, he's not eating properly. Like, all these crazy things are happening and I'm trying to manage both, but I literally felt so, you have no control because the other one's there. And then my ex-husband absolutely would not send him back. Mm-hmm. He started playing these really horrible games. No, you can move out here, he says. And I was like, no, we're not moving out there. Like, I have a job here. I am, my life is here. I've got a house. I was doing my thing. And I said, you guys moved. Like, I'm not moving there. And so he would use that on my younger son is, well, your mom doesn't care about you. And so my younger son started, acting out as well. So I've got two of these kids kind of acting out at the same time. So, I start noticing, I started finding drug paraphernalia when I would do Taylor's laundry. And there was some white powder in there, which I finally figured out was MDMA. So now I'm realizing he's actually moving up quite quickly into what he's doing. Okay, so it kind of went very fast. When he would have been 16, I'm just trying to do a timeline here. He ran away, and he went about half an hour from where we were living out in the country. And I noticed that, I was driving up to this house that he was at, and I noticed there was no power on. And this is like a mom that lives there with her son. And obviously I'm really concerned. There's no food in the house. So I would bring up groceries and drop them off, because I was like, what are you doing? Come home. I don't want to come home. He didn't want the rules anymore. And I just noticed he had lost a lot of weight. He just looked crappy. The school was calling me all the time. He wasn't coming in. The kids hadn't eaten in days, So anyway, I went to court, and I got something called a PCHAD order. I do believe that's what it was called, in which, the police end up, I guess it's like a warrant type thing. They go and pick the child up. They send them to a treatment center for 5 days. That's all you get. You get 5 days. So I lined up the next day to get an extension on that 5 days. And they literally told me that's all I was going to get. I said, it's so funny. I said, you take this, my son, he's 16 years old. And, I said, he can't go buy cigarettes or alcohol, but you will not remove him from this house. That is clearly, I found out she was a crack dealer. And they wouldn't remove him from the home. They did remove him to take him to the treatment center. And that's where he went for those 10 days. And I'll tell you, he was very, very pissed off at me for doing that. But the judge had told me the second time I went in, Robin, that is the last time we're going to do that for you. And he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that there's nothing more we can do for you. And I just thought, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is all you can do? You're going to go let my 16-year-old, you're not going to make him come home because he doesn't want to listen to the rules, but you're going to let him live in a crack house? It just blew my mind. It just totally blew my mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your one son's living with your husband in BC.
Yes.
Taylor's giving you the gears out here at home. Mm-hmm. And so begins the journey of Robin and her Alanon, mm-hmm. and her trying to manage. And basically from this point on, it's probably safe to say that most of your life was dedicated almost to trying to, worry where your sons are at, navigate different parties and scenarios and drugs, and kind of follow the leader, and he's leading with his behavior, and you're just kind of following in a line, watching him do what he's doing, right? So can you kind of describe as this progresses, he's 13 or 16 here?
Yeah, he's 16. My other son would have been 13 at that time. And
why don't you walk us through all those years and kind of some of the things you had to deal with, and doctors and police and overdose, and finding your son in different situations, driving across provinces, and what kind of things did you have to do for your boys?
Yeah, and you know what, probably on a different show, I'll come on and we'll discuss my younger son, because that's just like a whole other, realm of things. But I'll tell you, him just watching his older brother go through what he went through was traumatizing for him. It's his only brother. He was devastated to see his brother using drugs, and it went very quickly. At 16 years old, I remember, Taylor got a job drywalling. And, and he had moved back in with me. So he would kind of come in and out. He'd come, it was like he got really down on his luck, and then he'd come home and I'd let him in and I'd say, okay, you have to stay sober. If you want to be in this house, you can't use drugs. And I really wanted him back in school. So, I would try all these different things, and, or you have to have a job. If you're not going to go to school anymore, then you have to work. Kind of just doing everything, that I think is the right thing to do. Seriously, not really having a clue at that time. So he got this job drywalling, and like, I'm thinking, why is he never getting paid? And so I said, like, where's the money? And he was like, oh, and, making excuses. Well, then I realized she's paying him in cocaine. Like, she's giving him cocaine in lieu of money. And this took a long time to get out of him. And of course I said, you got to quit. Like, what the hell? You've got to get like a job that's actually going to pay you. No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen at that time. So he had worked with her for quite a while, and it was shortly thereafter the heroin started. Yeah. And then that was a whole, because I'd never seen anybody on that before.
And Taylor wasn't like a out there party animal either, was he?
He had a lot of social anxiety, actually. And so, he had really great friends growing up, and all of a sudden he didn't have those friends anymore. He was hanging out with a whole bunch of different people. And I'm not going to slam any of those people. Mm-hmm. I hold all of them dear in my heart because they're all suffering. But it was definitely, they were all drug users. There's no yeah, I know that because lots of them had passed away as well. Yeah. Did that answer that question? I'm sorry. My brain is going like a million miles an hour. So
that's perfect, Robin. So now it starts with weed.
Yeah.
A little bit of drinking. Then it's MDMA.
Yep.
And then it's the cocaine.
Yep.
And then now we're getting into some heroin.
Yep.
And
I think there was pills that led to the heroin.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had said to me one time that he had tried some pills at someone's house that was someone's prescription, and I think it was Percocets or Oxys. And he said, and he had had enough of them over the course while he was staying there that he wanted that feeling, and so heroin was the next step. And so, again, he's moving in and out so quickly, I'd catch him using drugs and I'd kick his ass out of the house, right? Like, it was like at the point where I was like, okay, I'm trying to try all these different things because you don't know what's right and what's wrong. And at first I was really like, okay, I'm going to try to do everything to help you. But then it was like, then I could see, and people are saying to me, you got to tough love this kid because that's the only way. So I started to tough love him. I'd kick him out when I'd say, yeah, you're not allowed to do drugs in my house. I was finding drug bags all over the floor. I found needles. I was like, no, you're not doing this in the house.
And by now he's doing needles.
Oh yeah. Like the needles, I'm finding the needles now. And he would do it in my bathroom. Like, even if he was coming over for a visit, he'd say, oh, I'm going to just go to the bathroom. He'd be in there for a really long time. And then he'd come upstairs and he would be completely nodding off on the sofa, like he's just,
Where was your emotional sanity at this point? Were you like off your rocker with like emotional back and forths, crying and anger and confusion? Like, where were you, or were you keeping it all pretty together?
If you saw me, you'd think I had it together, because everybody, I think would always think that of me, oh my God, you always look so, together. I would never thought, that you were going through anything like this. I was a bloody mess. And so how it manifested in me was, oh, I got shingles on my face, you know, or I all of a sudden would get these crazy rashes, or I would be buckled over in pain. And at that time, I didn't really think that that's what it was. I was just thinking, oh man, I'm just catching everything, you know, and I was sick constantly, and just, I felt awful. And I was torn up because I was a really good mom to my kids, you know, and I really never ever thought that anything like this would happen. You know, when you see them as little kids, and you spend so much time with them, and you do all these great things that you never had, and all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, it just comes, and it's so fast, and all of a sudden you're in it. And, you know, so to answer your question, no, I was just a fucking disaster.
And what was Taylor like as a little kid? I know from the memorial that he loved animals, and he was just like, seemed like just a little sweetie. What kind of kid was he?
A sweetheart. He was just so gentle. Just a very, very loving, affectionate, loved animals. He was that person that all the animals, no matter what, would be all over him. And he was funny, really, really funny. Yeah, he just has a good, you know, a good little sense of humor, and a laugh that's like hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, and I met him there like last year, and and he just had like a really sweet, soft energy to him, and he was very comfortable to be around. You know, he had just gotten his dog Bowser.
Oh my gosh, he loves the bows. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, he was a fucking good kid, man. And
just a beautiful soul. Yeah.
Okay, so as we kind of keep moving through, I don't know how much of the drug-a-log we can talk about, or you're comfortable talking about, but I know you found him, you know, having seizures. You've seen him like in terrible situations.
Oh yeah.
He ended up having a beautiful young girl with a woman who he met through using.
She's not, she wasn't a drug user. No.
No.
But they met at a party that he was at. Well, he was in active addiction, and she did end up getting pregnant quite quickly thereafter. Yeah.
And then, you know, he was single for quite a while after that relationship.
Yeah, like he was in a relationship after that for a few months, and then he had been single for a while up until he passed. I mean, yeah, he had girlfriends, but not a steady partner.
And so when I first met you, like, I would have had no idea that all of this stuff was your life, right? So I met you, we were chatting, and I started sharing some things about me. I'm not shy about my addiction and my recovery, and, you know, the pain that I've caused, and you know, as I was kind of explaining that to you, you immediately, and you said out of characterly, opened right up to me. And then as you're like telling me like some of your story in those first initial meetings, I was kind of sitting there going, God, are you fucking kidding me? This woman's been through all this fucking shit, and she's sitting here like this person today, and not ready to jump off a fucking bridge. So I was fucking blown away at just your whole demeanor, your whole energy and everything. And then so I get to know a little bit more about you and your family and your story. And you know, and you tell me that Taylor's sober. And he's doing pretty good. And he's out in Saskatchewan. And then I know that you were in school, you took addiction studies, focus on Indigenous, and me and you start comparing, theories on how to help people stay sober and get sober. And there was a lot of contradiction there from the way I do it and the way that they were teaching you to do it in school. And I think that's another topic on its own. But Taylor's out in Saskatchewan living with his uncle, basically over there so he can stay away from drugs.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
How did he get out there, and why was he out there?
Well, he had got a job at a flooring place, which he actually ended up getting his own place in another town that was away from my brother. And he had his own jobs, and, he was really, really doing really well. But as always, that I found with him is anxiety would creep in, and he'd start getting anxious about, he's out there by himself. He's lonely, he's pretty isolated. And so I started getting concerned about that, because of his mental health. And, it's hard. It's like, no matter what, he's going to get drugs, right? Like it's, so selfishly, part of me was like, well, maybe you need to come back here because at least you've got some of your family here with you, In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have told him to stay there. I don't know. But he was doing good for a span of time, and he always did that. Even here, he would go through periods where he'd be good for, a couple months, but then he'll go do it, and how many times did I tell you he overdosed? How many times did he have brain seizures, like huge brain seizures, sepsis, from dirty needles? He was so lucky in so many ways that he didn't have HIV and that he didn't have hepatitis. We got him tested for all that, and, and he was doing, I said, man, you've been blessed to not, have been exposed to that stuff, right? And then have that on your plate as well. So, the whole Saskatchewan thing, yeah, he was doing good, but he also wasn't doing good. And that was pretty normal for him. He would start something, but then you could start to see that he would start to have issues with what he was doing. This isn't working. And now looking at it, that's the addiction talking. He needed an excuse to use, right? And so he would start back, I don't want to do this anymore. I need to come back. But I agreed with him at that time because I always felt like at least I'm here to kind of monitor what he's doing, and encourage him. And at least I can get him, there's more resources to help here. When he's on his own, he just wouldn't do anything. And plus he's driving back here and then he's getting drugs anyway. And there was plenty of times I was on the phone with him while he was driving home, just completely inebriated. And he was pulling, said, you pull over and you go to bed on the highway, because I could tell he was slurring, and he was like, I'm not high. And I was like, yeah, you are. I know you're high right now. I can tell by how you're talking. And so, he would pull over and he'd spend the night on the side of the road. And,
So when I started describing the spiritual malady to you, and I was like, okay, your son or whoever it is, they're restless, irritable, discontent, living in that malady. Unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking the first few drinks or first few hoots. And basically that was Taylor. He could go somewhere, or maybe even stay and get a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe even get 6 months sober. But the vitality in his life was not really there. There might have been moments of vitality, but it was always like if Taylor was always a 10 through those addiction years where he would be at his best, even at his best, sometimes he's probably only a 7.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he kind of made it through life at like a 5 or a 6.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? And that's like, that is like very common. And that is the spiritual malady. And almost never in my experience does somebody stay sober like that.
Yeah.
Because they need that relief and they don't know what to do.
Totally.
And then, like, the powerlessness of his illness is he was powerless over using, and he's stone cold sober.
Yeah.
Because that spiritual malady drove him to need the relief. The problem was with Taylor, once he got the relief and he put it in his body, in his bloodstream, he's no longer drinking to escape and try to avoid that feeling. He has now set off the phenomenon of craving in his body, and he goes on the spree.
Totally. Yeah.
And then he was able to stop at certain intervals, but he couldn't stop for that long. So it was a continual fight and a continual battle. And I'm sure, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't know all of your story. He probably saw psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and all these different people. They probably got different drugs for his anxiety, for his depression, and whatever else. Would that be true?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I remember at one point there was probably like 10 pill bottles on the table that the doctors had given him to help him with all these different things. I was just furious. It's just one drug after another, slapping another Band-Aid over top of, and I kept saying, we got to get to the root of what is really wrong with you, honey. Like, otherwise we're just going to keep covering it up. And I said, you're feeling like shit from taking all this stuff. Like, this was causing this and this was causing this. And it was heightening everything even worse. And yet the doctors still were just giving him, like, just handing it out like no big deal. Like, oh, here, take this. Not even thinking, oh, maybe we need to look at how about your diet? Or how about we look at the fact that, you have, at that time he wasn't very spiritual. That did change towards the end. But, they don't ever take into account anything else. Except let's Band-Aid whatever this is. Let's not try to get to the root of what the problem is. And it just breaks my heart, because there's so many people suffering. I mean, I would drag him in to AA meetings. He did not want to be there at all. But I would make him come in there with me. Even if he was high, I didn't care. I was like, you're coming with me and we're going to sit there. Because there's always something we're going to get out of here. I think I got more out of it maybe than he did, because he didn't really want to go. He never really was, he'd always say, Mom, I don't want to be in a group. And there are people like that. Absolutely. They say that does not work for them to talk into a group. It's more of a one-on-one thing they want to have. And so I understood that to a degree, but I kept thinking, man, you're not even giving it a chance though. Like, if you just give it a chance and like maybe find a different group. Don't take this one group that we went to that, maybe wasn't a very great group and then brand everybody with that. But it's pretty hard to tell an addict that, because again, they're looking for any excuse to keep going, right? And you see that after a while, you start to recognize that.
And my experience is, unless the individual, and in this case Taylor, knows their true predicament of the malady that creates the obsession, and then the allergy of the body, and then the powerlessness. So there's two powerlessness. One is he's powerless over putting it in his body stone cold sober, with all of the seizures that he's had and brain hemorrhaging and all of these different situations that have happened, and the people that's been hurt by his drug use and him hurting himself. He still puts it in his body stone cold sober.
Yeah,
that's fucking insanity.
Total insanity.
The other powerlessness of that portion is, once it's in his body, the allergy of the body now takes over, and you can think you're making a choice of picking up the drink at that point or the drug, but your body now just picks it up without your brain actually being involved. So both of those things are so important for the person to understand, like, what a solution is to move forward. And I know that our society, the psychiatrists, psychologists, the Alberta Health Services, any of the government agencies, they don't tell anybody any of this.
No.
right?
No.
And like my success rate as somebody who works with addicts and alcoholics is 6 or 7 out of 10 are staying sober at once because they spend so much time with that.
Yeah.
And then they understand like what the solution to their life is. And then they follow the solution. Why? Because the gates of hell close on them with a fucking clang because they know they're fucked.
Yeah.
Taylor never knew how fucked he was. And the thing about guys like Taylor is they still think they got the power of choice. And he probably said to you, Mom, I make shitty choices.
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
But he never made the choice. He was powerless over that choice. That's what people don't understand. That's what he didn't understand. That's what, we've tried to do some work with your other son a little bit, who we haven't talked about for a reason today. He doesn't understand that. And until somebody understands that, their ears don't open. And they won't listen to the rest of what needs to be talked about. And there's so many prejudices against like these 12-step and spirituality, and people have their ideas of what all this shit is, but they don't really know what it is. But, I guess that's why I'm here doing this, and that's why you're here helping me do this, and me helping you, trying to help some other mother or some other kid out there that maybe listens to what we're saying today and goes, holy fuck, I learned something. Let's tune in to some more. Let's try to get a hold of Robin. Let's fucking get a hold of Bill. Let's see what the fuck's going on and see if there's something more that I can learn or know about this illness, because it's simple and it's complex in the same regard. The reason why we spent so much time talking about the behavior of the family, kind of as we were moving through your story, because of all of those behaviors and being in that environment really affects your spirit. And when there's a lot of anger, and when there's a lot of manipulation, when there's a lot of like low vibrating behaviors, it actually really affects the spirit, and it kind of starts developing the spiritual malady when we're young, right? And a lot of those behaviors manifest out when we're older, and then we need relief from it.
Yeah.
We need relief. And we talk about traumas in our society, and to me there's 2 traumas. There's the first trauma, which are mini traumas, of which we don't really talk about in our society. When we talk about traumas, we're talking about usually big things that happen that affect us in a negative way. Well, there's little traumas that we don't really understand, that we just take for granted. Like as we're like little kids and we lie, or we, we're bullies, or we do these little things, we're kind of dishonoring our own spirit, and we're traumatizing our spirit. When we watch dad yell at mom and call her names, and we accept that. We don't know it, but we're kind of dishonoring our own spirit. And through the dishonoring of our spirit as we're young and growing into like young people, those little traumas actually are what facilitate and perpetuate bigger traumas that people do and accept. And that's part of the spiritual malady, right? And part of that malady is, like you talked about, doing a lot of inner work in your own life. I think the only way to really combat some of this malady is to really go into ourselves and look at who and what we are, what parts of us aren't serving us, and then being willing to fucking let those things go and try to fucking change, right? And some of that's really humiliating. Like some of the things that you put up with that you had to acknowledge fucking wasn't nice, right?
No.
And a lot for me too. So that's kind of the root of this, right? So do you have anything to say on that before I kind of go into my next piece?
No, I think you said it really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as we kind of get closer to the end here, and don't think that I'm going to end it at a certain time. It's going to end when it ends. So Taylor moves back home. He's back in Calgary. He's, from what I understand, he decided to quit the flooring business. He decided to go up north and work the rigs where the big money is. And
yeah, there was a lag in between that time where he wasn't working at all, and he was in quite a terrible depression. Yeah. So there was a few months of, I'm going to say maybe 3 months, where things weren't moving along, yeah.
And then he gets this job working the rigs, and he goes up north, and he's making some pretty good money, and then he's coming back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, he was up there for such a short time, really, before he passed. Like, you think, the first time I think he was up there for 6 weeks, and then he came home, and I saw him, and I knew immediately that, he was home partying. And, the second time I saw him, he, came in, and he was just messed right up. He was falling into the walls. And it was like escalating to a point where I was like, oh boy, like, this isn't good. Like, there's times where he seemed to manage it a lot better, but he seemed to be quite out of control. And so, we had the talk, as, it was quite an open talk, even though he was in complete denial that night and quite mad that I called him out on it. I said, you need to go home and go to bed because you're a mess right now and you need to go to bed. And he, swore, and he got so mad at me, and don't tell me what to do. I'm tired. Can't I be tired? I just worked for 6 weeks in a row. And I just said, absolutely, you are entitled to be tired. But I said, but you're also using drugs. So go home and get some rest and then sober up. And so he, and then the next day he was still quite mad at me because he was coming off of his drugs. And then he said, oh, wait a minute. His exact words on the phone. You took addictions studies for quite a while. He goes, you can't lie. I can't lie to you. I go, well, I thought we covered this before. There's no point of lying to me. I'm not giving you shit. I just want to be able to talk about this because I want you to get help, right? I was always trying to get him help. And God love him. This kid would follow me. I had him do a sweat. I'd have him in talking circles. I mean, I would drag him to do some of the craziest shit. Like, hey, come up and see my friend who does energy work. And I'd leave him there for an hour. And he was always willing to do these things. But he was not really willing to do treatment. And he was not willing to sit in those meetings. But closer to the end, he said to me one day, Mom, I know I didn't used to believe in God. But he said, I believe in God now. And I said, oh, really? And I was really happy to hear that. And he goes, it's kind of weird. He's like, but I'm seeing evidence. And I said, yeah, there's like miracles and stuff, right? And he's like, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, that's good, honey. Like, that's a really good start to acknowledge God. I said, do you think you can start praying to God? And he seemed like he was open to that, but he wasn't really sure like how that was going to go down. And I remember when I didn't pray, and I remember you got me praying, and it was so awkward for me at the beginning because I was like, oh, am I doing it wrong? Like it was just, and now I pray every day. And it's just become like second nature. But at those beginning, like probably 3 weeks, I was just like, oh, I don't know what to say. I feel like this is hokey almost, even though I know there's a God, So he was making these big kind of changes. And we had some beautiful conversations in those last 2 weeks that I am just like so grateful in my heart that we were able to have. But the last kind of weekend, he got home on a Wednesday, and I just said, please stay sober for your 2 days that you have off. Just stay sober, sweetie, okay? And he's like, no, Mom, I'm going to, and he was doing so good. He seemed like he was doing good, and then I saw him on the Thursday, and I gave him this big huge hug, and he kind of told me about what he had been doing, and he said he was hungover, like he had been drinking. And I just said, okay, just stay sober because you got to go to work tomorrow. You got to leave. And he said, yeah, I'm just going to go home and go to bed. And I said, yeah, go to bed, go rest, because you only got a short time off. And then he works really crazy hours. And then that was the last hug. Which is so crazy. I sit here and I think, I wish I could have hugged him longer, even though I gave him like a really long hug. I wish I would have hugged him longer. I told him I loved him. I always told him I loved him. And every time I would see him, we'd always talk about like You know, if you're gonna use, like, I don't want you to use, but if you're gonna use, just be careful. Be careful with what you're using. You know, be careful. Isn't that terrible that as a mom you have to get to that stage? And I know there's other moms, like, you do things that you say you would never do. Like, if I go back in time, there's so many things that I said I would never do, and that I found myself doing. As you're watching your child scream in agony, detoxing his body, and here I am, you know, driving to a drug dealer's house to get him something to help to help him through. So, you know, just, it's terrible. It's terrible. And I did shit like that I never thought I would have to do. It is like the worst thing, watching your child in pain. You know, I liken it to like terminal cancer. You know, it's almost like that. It's like you are just feeling like your child is going to die every single day, but you don't know, you know, and you're hopeful that they're going to get better. And I don't mean this disrespectfully to anybody whose child has passed from cancer or who has cancer. It's like, it's that disease, right? It's that disease of addiction. And it's like a roller coaster from hell. And you get any little snippet of anything positive and you're just so over the moon. You know, it just goes in this hugely big wave of like, yes, no, he's gonna get over this. And I just kept believing in him. And in fact, like a couple days before, we had this huge conversation and I said, I'm never gonna give up on you, ever. I will never give up on you. Even though you've given up on yourself, I said, I won't give up on you. I said, I just love you so much. And I said, and I just don't want you to die. And he said, I would never do that to you. And so the morning that we found him, I was so mad. I was so mad. I was like, you promised, you know. Nothing can prepare you, ever. Even though I had prepared myself, I thought, for that day. Nothing can prepare you for that day. It's still unbelievable to me. I'm still going moments where I just don't believe it's real.
You guys used to talk every single day, right?
Every day. And every day we told each other we loved each other, even if he was mad at me for nagging him for whatever. And we just had the most amazing conversations, and it's so interesting to me how things lined up right at those final days, those final weeks. All these interesting things were happening, and you know, and like being in the deep grief that I was in, and I still am in, but I come in and out of it, and like today is a good day. But I definitely go into deep grieving.
Is there anything positive that you can pull out of it, or is it too early to see anything positive?
I gotta think about that. I mean, the positives are, I have peace in my heart because he knew how much I loved him. He really did. And we talked about all that stuff. And like, I always thought that he maybe thought really lowly of me. You know, like my mom's a pain in the ass and she's a nag and she's all this stuff. And about a month before he passed away, I asked him in my kitchen, I was like, I've got this really weird question. Like, what do you think of me? I said, I think that you think I'm boring, I'm poor, and I said something else, and I'm no fun or something. And he looked at me, he goes, that's what you think I think of you? And I go, yeah. He goes, oh my God, Mom. He goes, I think you're fucking great. He goes, and you're very ambitious. And he goes, and you're fucking hilarious. He said, "No, don't ask me anymore. I don't like giving out compliments." And I started kind of crying, and I don't cry easily. And I just looked at him and just said, "Thank you. That means so much to me." So we had these amazing conversations in that final month, really, that were really beautiful. And so I have no regrets. I really don't. It's been a hell of a ride. And and can I tell parents the right way to do things? I can't do that. Everybody is so individual and unique in their journey with their children. But what I can say is just don't stop loving them, like don't shut your heart down. Just love them fully. When you're with them, act like this is the last moment. I tried to do that all the time. I was just always, this could be our last moment together, and I just want to savor, even though honestly he slept so often around me, but even those little snippets that we would have were just precious to me.
So my dad, I know no human power really is enough to keep somebody from using. You're not powerful enough. His daughter wasn't powerful enough. His girlfriend. In our program, they teach us no human power. It has to be something greater than human. It has to be this power that can save us.
Right.
Pull us back from these gates of death. And, my brother is, active in his using, and kind of similar to you. I've been preparing myself for years, and I don't know if I'm prepared or not, but I'm as prepared as I can be. And so a few years ago, my dad said, "I'm going to help save your brother." And I'm like, "Dad, no human power, man." He's like, "Son, he's my son. If I didn't at least try my hardest for however long it's going to be, then I don't know if I could live with myself." And as much as he knew that no human power and it's probably not going to work, he had to try.
Yes.
And I have to let him, because that's his son. And you're going to do whatever you can do for your kids, even though sometimes you might be enabling or making it not easier, but the pain of losing them is too great, right? The thought of losing them is too great. And so my dad tried what he tried, and it didn't work. And so I can relate, but I can't relate fully because I've never lost a child, and I've never had my kids have had their problems with drugs and alcohol, but I never had to deal with it like you did, or my dad or my mom does. Right? So
it's a really tough thing for parents. And the enabling thing, surprisingly, I really didn't enable a lot, I never, there was a time where, early on, I was taking up groceries and, I was kind of doing those kind of things. There came a point where I would not give him money at all, because I was like, "I'm not funding your drugs. If you're starving, I'll buy you food. If you have, you need some new shoes." And maybe that's enabling too. I don't know, but it felt to me like it wasn't as much as it could have been, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, it's so hard, right? It's so hard to say. And you can't beat yourself up as a parent. You only do the best that you can, and when you when you know better, you do better, right? And that's how it evolved over those 15 years is, I did learn lessons, and I did develop really good boundaries, because I literally was dying. There was so many times I was at the absolute worst, thinking, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be here, and I don't want to outlive my kids, and even today, it's hard. It's hard every day for me, because I'm like, this is not what I want. I don't want to have to go through this pain. And it would be so easy for me to take prescription drugs right now to get me through the pain. you know, and I've had people suggest just take Ativan and you know, and just, you know, you need that right now. But you know what I said the other day is, you know what I need to go through this pain so I can get through this. This is the only way. I can cover it up with Ativan and I can cover it up with pills, but I said it's still going to be there. I need to deal with this now, and it's fucking brutal, and it's painful, and it's so many different things, but it's also beautiful and profound, and you know, so many things are starting to come into the light, like when you're in the super deep grief of the beginning time. And of course it's an evolution, and that beginning time was, oh my, I couldn't pray. I couldn't do anything. All of it, like I was questioning everything. I was questioning, how can God, if God, you know, how can God allow this to happen if there is a God? So I questioned everything I have ever believed in, and I numbed right out. I didn't want to let anything in. And so that has kind of changed over the past, I would say, week, where I've started to pray again and getting in touch and feeling like, okay, I'm starting to feel again. Yeah. You know, it's our protection mechanisms, I think, you know, like so many things come up when you go through that. It's unbelievable.
And like
grieving.
Our society is, you know, big on telling us don't feel pain.
Yeah.
You know, don't feel pain. You want to avoid pain. Take this, go here, do that.
Yeah.
Have this, buy this, do that. You know, and, you know, what a pillar you are for standing in your own authenticness and your ability to go through the pain. God actually gave us everything we need to grow and grieve and learn through the pain. And you know, my hope is that you grow somehow through this, right? And sometimes the flowers grow out of the shit. Right? And like most people would never do what you're doing because the doctors are so convincing and our society is so good at indoctrinating us with what we should do. But you've woken up enough in your life to know, and you got the knowledge and power in you of what you should do, and you're doing it, right? What's the message for, you know, you kind of gave us a message for other parents, like don't give up, right? So give me one message for the addict, son or daughter, and one message for the parent.
Gosh. I mean, for the parent, I would say value those precious moments, you know, just suck them in, be present. Don't be thinking about their addiction. Don't be like, you know, harping on any of it. Just have them in that moment. And I mean, of course, if it's obviously if they're really high and causing trouble, I know that's not feasible, but you know, those moments where they are sober, they have those moments, and just love them. Just love them. You know, and for an addict, you know, make those amends to people, you know. Taylor and I talked a lot about the amends, and he was actually really making a lot of amends, and he still had a ways to go, you know, but there was some that he was really, really just trying to like, and he was trying to change, you know, a lot of his stuff, like a lot of his shitty behavior he was starting to recognize, where before he would just be like, oh, it's that other person, it's them, and you know, and he's really started to, and I think it's important, you know, and cut your parents some slack. You know, we're just trying our best and we love you, and that's what it is there's just so much love there, and everybody parents differently, and it comes across differently, and it can come across as anger, and it's all because we're fucking hurting. We're just so hurt. You're our babies and we love you, and you know, that's it. It's not because we're trying to ruin your life or anything. We just want the best for you. We want to see you happy. We want to see you grow. Yeah.
So I asked you, or you had mentioned to me a few weeks ago that maybe there was something you could do to maybe not have him die for no reason. You know, and has anything come up, or do you have anything in mind of a direction or purpose that you want to bring to the world? Are you in discernment mode? I know you're going to school right now for some whatever it is. And is there anything that you want to go out and do, or are you going to wait for an answer? Or
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because, of course, right off the hop, I wanted to do like some kind of foundation in his name. And I'm not totally sure what that looks like right now, because I was trying to figure, I was talking with some family. My younger son came up with, something with animals he said would be really beautiful to honor Taylor, because Taylor loved animals so much. So, we could go in that direction too. I still really am feeling drawn to help other parents. I don't know what that looks like either, because I have so much going on right now, but yeah.
Well, Robin, I'm sure the Creator will guide you in the way that you need to be guided. And, I know since I've known you, I think you're one of the most fabulous women on the planet Earth. I always did, and I still do.
Thank you.
And, you can always reach out to me, and maybe, maybe someone hears this and changes their life. And if anyone wants to get a hold of Robin, is that a possibility?
Certainly. Yep.
Maybe they could email you. What's your email?
My email is, it's a long one. It's intune@gmail.com. And you can maybe post that. Can you do that? Otherwise, They're going to be like, what? What'd you just say?
Yeah, I'll put it in the text on the description of this podcast.
Okay.
And I will also, field it here if you want to get in touch with me. Bill@BILLWARD.life. You can always email me, and I can get you in touch with Robin. If you have any ideas, or you just want to chat with her, she's an amazing human being. You've helped me grow and learn in my own life, and I just want to thank you for spending the time and opening your heart and coming here to do this. And maybe we can do a follow-up episode later down the road. And I just want to say thank you for being you and doing this. And my heart goes out to you and your family as you kind of grieve this for quite a while here, forever probably. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, William. It was an honor to be here in your presence. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Theudrcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARD.life to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.